Good to be with you once again, brothers and sisters, and all praises to the Most High. I'm your host, the Apostle Reuben of IUPR Bible Radio Podcasting. Out of Little Rock, Arkansas, to the true saints of the Most High God. Decided to have a little fun this evening. As you can see, we're in the book of Romans, chapter 11. Now, you know, Romans chapter 11, out of all the chapters in Romans, is the most read in Christendom, or Christianity, of course, because it features the Gentiles being grafted in. I would say, brothers and sisters, 10%, dare I say 3%, of Romans 11 is actually being quoted from the Bible. The other 96 to 95% of it is just read and interpreted by the minds of Christians. Now again, when you're reading the letters of Paul, you better know the Old Testament, or you're not going to understand it. So let's begin. The book of Romans 11:11. I say then, have they, that they are the Jews, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid. No. But rather through their fall, salvation is come unto the Gentiles, for to provoke them to jealousy. Now, we cannot go any further until you have the understanding of who these Gentiles are. Now, you have to let the Bible do it. You have to let the Bible tell you who the Gentiles are. You have to do that. You cannot allow Christians to come up and say, oh, it's non-Israelite, non-Jew. If you don't see a chapter and a verse with non-Jew, non-Israel in it, then that is what they say it is. A carnal definition. You have to show me a verse. You have to show me a verse that says none Israel, none Jew, and they can't. I've researched it. They cannot. So it is a carnal, which means a definition from their minds. And they have all our people, even these fake pastors, saying, oh, it's none Jew, none Israelite. Oh, it's none Jew. Someone who is not a Jew. Where's the verse? And they tell their members it is a non-Israelite, non-Jew. Now, see, it being a non-Israelite, non-Jew, and they call you an African American, sure, you're going to be willing to say that a Gentile is a non-Israelite, non-Jew. You're willing to, not knowing that's not what it is. I want to go back up. I say then, have they, the Jews, stumbled that they should fall? God forbid. But rather through their fall, salvation is coming to the Gentiles. Now, Gentiles. We're going to go into chapter and verse to see who the Gentiles were Paul was talking about, not the Christians. So, remember, I want to go to Romans 15. We're going to be in the book of Romans for a little while. Romans 15. I want to get straight to the point. Romans 15 and verse 8. Now I say that the Messiah Christ was a minister of the circumcision. The circumcision are the Jews. Everybody should know that. For the truth of God, to confirm the promises made unto the fathers. Watch, here we go. And that the Gentiles might glorify God for his mercy. Stop. What you got to understand, brothers and sisters, is there is a certain group of Gentiles that was promised mercy. You have to know who they were. You have to know who they were. And that the Gentiles might glorify God for his mercy. Who were these Gentiles that were going to glorify God for his mercy? Back to Romans. See, this is in Romans. The book of Romans chapter 9. Romans chapter 9. we go. Romans chapter 9, verse 23. And that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy. Mercy now, mercy. Which he had afore. Afore means in the Old Testament. Afore prepared unto glory. Watch. The vessels of mercy. Even us, whom he hath called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles? Question mark. Gentiles? Question mark. He's going to continue. As he also saith in OZ, I will call them my people which were not my people, and her beloved which was not beloved. Pay close attention. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, ye are not my people, there shall they be called the children of the living God. Now, when it was concerning the Gentiles, it was pretty clear that they were not my people in verse 26. These Gentiles in verse 24 was not his people in verse 26. We have to learn to put these things together. So again, we're letting you see, even us whom he hath called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles? Question mark. Look at this. As he saith also in Hosea. Hosea is Hosea. I will call them my people which were not my people. And her beloved which was not beloved. So these are things you got to understand, which were not my people. So Christians say, oh, well, that means that he's going to call up he's going to call them call the people that were not his people. No, it says as he saith also in Hosea. So we got to go back to the prophet Hosea to get the clarity of what Paul is quoting. Paul got this out of the Old Testament. He is testifying the Gentiles that he's talking about out of the Old Testament. So when we go back to Hosea chapter 2, this is what Paul was quoting, Hosea chapter 2. We're going to get straight up. I'm not going to try to make this that long. I'm going to hit the key points. Hosea chapter 2:23. And I will sow her unto me in the earth. Her is Israel. And I will have mercy upon her that have not obtained mercy. And I will say unto them which were not my people, thou art my people, and they shall say, thou art my God. The mercy upon her is Israel. It's not the nations. The her is not the nations. The her is Israel. And that had not obtained mercy. And I will say to them which were not my people, thou art my people, and they shall say, thou art my God. Now, this is actually a continuation from Hosea 1:10. Look at this. Hosea 1 verse 10. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, that was said to Israel, ye are not my people. In the place where it was said unto them, like here, where we live at now, they're trying to tell us we're not the true children of Israel. We're just African Americans. We're just Indians. We're whatever besides Israel. In the place where it was said unto them, the them is Israel. Them is Israel. Ye are not my people. Wait. Because Paul said the same thing. The book of Romans chapter 9. Romans chapter 9. Verse 26. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, the them would be the Gentiles in verse 24. This is still concerning the Gentiles in verse 24. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, there shall they be called the children of the living God. So who was this said to? In the place where it was said unto them. Who was the them? This is still concerning the Gentiles now. In the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people. Back to Hosea. Hosea. Now you can get we hope you can, brothers and sisters, you can get a more clear understanding on what was going on. But because Paul is quoting, why would Paul be quoting Hosea 1 and 10 concerning the Gentiles? Why? Why couldn't he just make up something off the top of his head? Because Paul was about chapter and verse. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, the them are the children of Israel at the top of the verse. This is what Paul was quoting concerning the Gentiles. You Christians, get with it, man. In the place where it was said unto them, Israel, ye are not my people, meaning Gentiles. When you were not his people, you were Gentiles. When you were not his people, you were Gentiles. There it shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living God. This is what Paul was quoting concerning the Gentiles. Because at a time and a place, it was said that you were not his people. But in the same place where it was said you are not his people, there's going to be a people that tell you you are the true children of Israel. And that's happening now. So those are the Gentiles that would have mercy. Northern kingdom. That's what this was talking about. The children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, that them is Israel. Ye are not my people. There it shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living God. Over and over. The Gentiles that would receive mercy would be northern kingdom, not other nations. You will not find in the text that God is going to have mercy on other nations. That's foolish. That's why you have to know what Gentiles is. That's why when you look at Isaiah chapter 11, when you're real with yourselves, brothers and sisters, Isaiah 11 and 10. And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. And to it shall the Gentiles seek. Gentiles. And his rest shall be glorious. The Gentiles seek. But watch this. And it shall come to pass in that day, that very same day, that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people. His people. Not all people. Which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the isles of the sea. Look. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. The Israelites were dispersed to the four corners of the earth. You could see the dispersed at the four corners would be the dispersed among the nations. So you can see the dispersed with the Israelites among the nations. But you need to see that nations I'm not going to do it. I'm going to go a different way. I don't want this to take too long. The dispersed were the Israelites. Let's, again, now I went over this in the last podcast episode, but I'm going to go over it again. Just a couple of verses. Ezekiel 36, verse 19. Ezekiel 36, 19. Just to pick it up. I scattered them. The them are the Israelites. The them are the Israelites. That's right. Watch this. I should have started verse 17. Son of man, when the house of Israel dwelt in their own land, they defiled it by their own way and by their doings. Their way was before me as an unclean and of remove. Let me read it. Their way was before me as the uncleanness of a removed woman. Nasty. Wherefore I poured my fury upon them for the blood that they had shed upon the land, and for their idols, wherewith they had polluted it. Their sins, idols are sins, but pay attention. And I scattered them among the Gentiles, and they were dispersed throughout the countries. The Israelites were dispersed among the Gentiles, according to their way and according to their doings, I judge them. So Israel's judgment for committing sin in their land was to be scattered among the Gentiles, dispersed among the Gentiles. You can see by the text who was dispersed among the Gentiles. No doubt about it. We're not going to argue with the Christians. So you should know where I'm going now. You should know where I'm going now. John 7:35. Then said the Jews among themselves, whither will he go that we shall not find him? Will he go unto the dispersed among the Gentiles? Who was dispersed among the Gentiles that you saw, that you read? Israelites. And teach the Gentiles? So the dispersed among the Gentiles were Gentiles. This verse confirms that Israelites by their own brethren. And you know what verse this reminds me of? Look at this. I'm going to show you what verse matches this one. What verse? Look at this. The book of Ephesians, chapter 2. The book of Ephesians, chapter 2, in verse 11. Wherefore remember that ye being in times past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision. See, when it says, wherefore remember that ye being in times past Gentiles, remember, brothers and sisters, if you listen to us, the letter is written to the saints. It's not written to everybody. You cannot apply Jim to a letter written to John. If you wrote a letter to John and Jim read that letter, he just read that letter. That doesn't mean that that letter was for him. The letter was for John. But the Christians want to try to say, well, Paul's letters are letters of example. No, Paul had a target audience he wrote to. And Ephesians 1 tells you who he wrote to the saints. Now, at this point, when you look at the saints over and over, it has to be proven. The saints, you can't say the saints are believers. No, that's not, you will have to find. See, that goes right along with saying that the Gentiles are non-Israelites, non-Jews. Can't do that. You have to be able to show the verse. So if we show you verses, and don't let the pastors bully you or say, oh, no. If they can't show you a verse, see, the problem with our people is when they ask a pastor for a verse and they don't give them one, they stay following that pastor. If I ask the pastor for a verse and he can't give it to me, I'm going to go to who can. This is my salvation. I'm not going to let a man, I'm not going to let a friendship, I'm not going to let a family member, I'm not going to let anybody remove salvation from me because of their personal feelings. I haven't yet. And I'm not. When you're a real prophet, you don't worry about what other people think. You have to present the verse and the proof to people. You have to. Psalms 148:14. He also exalted the horn of his people, the praise of all his saints, even of the children of Israel. A people near unto him, praise ye the Lord. The saints are a people. They were established as a people, and until they can show me that the saints are all nations on the planet Earth in a chapter and a verse, then they're the children of Israel. Alone. You can't make something say what you want it to say. Can't do that. That makes you a liar. All right. Psalms 149, verse 1. Praise ye the Lord, sing unto the Lord a new song, and his praise in the congregation of saints. Let Israel rejoice in him that made him. Again, you can see that the congregation of the saints was Israel. You're not going to find a verse where the saints or anybody else, even if you go to Psalms 106:16. It says, they envied Moses also in the camp, and Aaron the saint of the Lord. See, Aaron was a Levite, a child of Israel, saint of the Lord. The saints will always apply to Israel. It will never apply to another type of people. It's not going to happen. The reality is, brothers and sisters, is some things Christians cannot prove. So I want to go to Hosea one more time. Hosea one more time, 11. See, here's the one I want, because it's the one that confirms the New Testament. Ephraim, which is the northern kingdom, compasseth me about with lies, and the house of Israel with deceit. But Judah yet ruleth with God, and is faithful with the saints. So Judah in the time of Christ would be the faithful of the saints. But that doesn't mean Ephraim wouldn't be among them, few in number. Ephraim was among them, few in number. Again, you see Ephraim plus Judah, saints. No other nation were the saints but one, whether it was two kingdoms or one together under David and Solomon. Bottom line is, the saints are the children of Israel. So now when you go right on back to Ephesians 2, well, I say Ephesians 1, verse 1 again. Paul, an apostle of the Messiah Christ by the will of God, to the saints which are at Ephesus, and to the faithful in the Messiah Christ. Saints, to the saints that are in Ephesus, not to everybody. This was to a specific group. And this specific group, Paul tells in this specific group, wherefore remember that ye being in times past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision. Because of what? Idolatry. Worshiping other gods. By that understanding, you can see. Let me go ahead and read it. Wherefore remember that ye being in times past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision, by that which is called the circumcision, meaning their brethren, the circumcision, were calling their brethren Gentiles, as you saw in John 7:35. That's why it says, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision. So the circumcision was calling the saints in verse 1 Gentiles, who were uncircumcised. That means that they were Gentiles in the flesh being uncircumcised, meaning that they were in idolatry. That's why, back to John 7:35, this is the example. That's why it says, wherefore remember that ye being in times past Gentiles in the flesh, idolatry, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision. So the circumcision was calling their brethren Gentiles, like you see in John 7:35. Watch this. John 7. See, that was the enmity between the two kingdoms. John 7 verse 35. It says, then said the Jews among themselves, whither will he go that we shall not find him? Question mark. Will he go unto the dispersed? The dispersed were the Israelites because of their sins among the Gentiles. That lets you know the dispersed among the Gentiles. We just read it. We just read it in Ezekiel. Here it is, Ezekiel. Ezekiel 36. We just read who was dispersed among the Gentiles. Ezekiel 36:19. And I scattered them among the Gentiles and have dispersed them through the countries. Countries is where the Gentiles were. According to their way and according to their doings, I judged them. So we can see who was scattered among the Gentiles. Israelites. The them is Israel. That was up in verse 17. There's no getting around it. So back to John 7. Verse 35. Then said the Jews among themselves, whither will he go that we shall not find him? Will he go unto the dispersed among the Gentiles? Who was dispersed among the Gentiles? Israel. And teach the Gentiles? Why would they call their own brethren, which were dispersed, Gentiles? Because of enmity. The dispersed among the Gentiles were Gentiles themselves. But the Christians try to avoid this. Why? Because this verse notes that the dispersed, which was Israelites, were Gentiles as well. Their own brethren were calling the dispersed among the Gentiles, Gentiles. Meaning Israelites were also Gentiles. This is what that's saying. And it just doesn't say it here. Again, it just doesn't say it here. 1 Corinthians. Now, I'm chipping off of some of what I went over today. But we know Romans 9:3, for I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen, according to the flesh, who are Israelites. There is no verse in the book that is going to tell you brethren means anything else. There's no context, no nothing that's going to show that brethren means anything but your own people. I don't care what testament it's in. I don't care which one it's in. You will never see brethren mean anything else. Ezekiel 11:15 again. Son of man, thy brethren, even thy brethren, the men of thy kindred. Your brethren is the men of your kindred or your kinsmen, like Paul said. That's your brethren. A white man, a black man, no brethren. If it wasn't here, it doesn't exist. These wicked pastors, they like to try to change the narrative of things now that we're waking up. Nah, we're okay with that. Son of man, thy brethren, even thy brethren, the men of thy kindred. Your brethren is your own people. Own people. And all the house of Israel holy are they unto whom the inhabitants of Jerusalem have said, get ye far from the Lord, unto us this land is given in possession. But the point I wanted to make was the brethren was the men of your kindred. That's the biblical brethren, not something else. Oh, spiritual brethren. No, it's not going to be found in the Bible. Not going to happen. So going back to Romans 9, Paul notes the same thing that is written here. Son of man, thy brethren, even thy brethren, the men of thy kindred. For I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen. Kinsmen is kindred, according to the flesh, who are Israelites. Now, I went over this again to show you in 1 Corinthians 12, verse 1. See, we have the Christians here. 1 Corinthians 12 and 1. Now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I would not have you ignorant. Ye know that ye were Gentiles, carried away unto these dumb idols, even as ye were led. The brethren were Gentiles because of idolatry. There is no non-Jew, non-Israelite in the Bible. What you're reading is the meaning of Gentiles. What the Bible gives you. We saw in Romans 9, verse 24 through 26, that those Gentiles were Israelites that were not his people because someone was calling them not his people. We read that. Everybody that's wise know that Romans 9, 24 through 26, those Gentiles were northern kingdom. Everybody knows John 7:35, those dispersed among the Gentiles were called Gentiles by their own brethren. They were who? Israelites scattered. And now again, you can see now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren. Paul's brethren were Jews. Predominantly at this time. There's no other brother besides his own people. Now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I will not have you ignorant. Ye know that ye were Gentiles. The brethren were Gentiles carried away unto the dumb idol, which meant that they, his brethren, were Gentiles because of idolatry. Because of idolatry, they were Gentiles. Not because it was none Jew, none Israel. That's not written. So understand when we're talking about the Gentiles, because we're going to go over it. We're going to see some more of it. I want to go back to Romans 11 because I don't want to get pitched off. I will go in other places. Now, you have to determine, brothers and sisters, who is talking about here. It says, I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? Talking about southern kingdom. God forbid. But rather through their fall, salvation has come unto the Gentiles. We've proven by chapter and verse that the Gentiles would be northern kingdom. Over and over. And parts of southern, I'm not going to even lie, parts of southern kingdom as well. They were uncircumcised too. But it was more or less the northern kingdom, which was few in that time, than southern kingdom. So salvation has come to the Gentiles for to provoke them, which are the Jews, to jealousy. Now pay attention now. Now if the fall of them be the riches of the world, who would the world be? Who would the world be? Now remember, I want to go to the book of John, chapter 18. John chapter 18. In verse 20, Christians have we got them all. The Messiah answered him, I spake openly to the world. Who would this world be? Christ is about to tell you who the world is. We're not talking about what the Christians think. We're talking about what they're talking about. The Messiah answered him, I spake openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whether the Jews always resort. And in secret, I have said nothing. When Christ says he spoke openly to the world, he spoke to the Jews. The Jews were that world. Because back to Romans 15, the Christians got a big problem here. They have a big problem here. It says, now I say that the Messiah Christ was the minister of the Jews for the truth of God, to confirm the promises made unto the fathers. The only one Christ came to teach was the Jews. Christ did not teach other nations, player, and that is what I know because I researched it. And I guarantee you, if you Google it, be a Google prophet in Google, did Christ teach the circumcision only? It's going to tell you something. It's going to surprise you. The only ones Christ taught was the Jews. People think that Christ taught everybody. No, he did not. He only taught the circumcision. Acts 10:39. The book of Acts 10. The book of Acts 10. Let me show you something. The book of Acts 10. I want to show you this. Acts 10. I guess I'll read. Verse 38 with it. Acts 10:38. How God anointed the Messiah of Nazareth with the Holy Ghost and with power, who went about doing good and healing all that were oppressed of the devil. So they were oppressed of the devil, the lawless one, the sinner. For God was with him, and we are his witnesses. And we are witnesses of all things which he did, both in the land of the Jews and in Jerusalem, whom they slew and hanged on a tree. Look at this again. I got excited. Let me read it over. And we are witnesses of all things which he did, both in the land of the Jews and in Jerusalem, whom they slew and hanged on the tree. Christ done all his miracles and his teachings among Jews. Jews, not nowhere else. Those were the lost sheep of the house of Israel, the Jews. They were the part that was lost. So when we go back to, wait a minute now, let's go back to John chapter 18. John chapter 18, verse 20. The Messiah answered him, I spake openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whether the Jews always resort. And in secret I have said nothing. So the world was the Jews. Christ didn't speak. You understand. Christ didn't teach anybody, do any miracles among anybody else but the Jews. Now, you may ask about the Syrophoenician woman and then the Ethiopian woman. Now, what you have to understand is if Christ didn't minister but to anybody but the Jews, then you have to wonder about those that he healed. Remember, the Gentiles shall receive mercy. Who were the Gentiles that would receive mercy? Your example of those two women would be one northern kingdom and one southern. No mercy would be given to the other nations. People misquote Mark 7:27 and Matthew 15:26. They misquote that. Those verses. Or Matthew 15:24 through 26. They don't, a lot of people don't know there was no way Christ would give mercy to any other nation besides who was prophesied to receive the mercy in the first place. You can't show me a verse where God would have mercy on other nations. It's not there. You have to have a prophecy with that. And the problem is Christians have no prophecy with their theory. Got to show me a verse with the word mercy in it. So the world would be the Jews. That's why when you go back to the book of John chapter 12, we know what we're talking about. Now, this is at the feast. John chapter 12, verse 18. For this cause, the people also met him. Now, the only ones that are at this feast would be Jews. There's no, that's why it's called the Feast of the Jews. For this cause, the people also met him, for they had heard that he had done this miracle. The Pharisee therefore said among themselves, perceive ye how that ye prevail nothing? Behold, the world is gone after him. Who would this world be that are going after Christ at the feast? The Jews. The Jews. That's why it says in Acts 11. We've got the verses. Acts 11. Acts 11. Let's drop on down to verse 28. Pay attention. And there stood up one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit that there should be great dearth throughout all the world. See? All the world. Look at this world. Throughout all the world. All the world. You're going to find out who this world was in the next verse. And there stood up one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit that there shall be great dearth throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. Then the disciples, every man according to his ability, determined to send relief unto the brethren which dwelt at Judea. Again, Judea is the world, because that's where the famine was. Judea. It wasn't everybody. If you look at the context of the word world here, if the world is going through a great dearth, then how, okay, let's just say it this way. If the world was the planet, all people, then how did the disciples in other lands come up with the goods to send to Judea if everybody's in that dearth? If everybody's in the dearth, then wouldn't nobody have the ability to send nobody nothing? If everybody on earth was in a dearth, which is famine, then nobody could send nobody nothing. Nobody would have the ability to send nothing, no relief, no nothing. Letting you know that this world, again, was Judea. You got to use common sense. We can see verses where the world was the Jews. Understand what you're reading here, because you're going to see. Back to Romans 11. Romans 11. And actually, brothers and sisters, going back to Isaiah 45. Isaiah 45:17. But you're going to see how this plays out as we go along. I could have easily went back to Isaiah 45:17, and that's where you can go. But Israel shall be saved in the Lord with an everlasting salvation. Ye shall not be ashamed nor confounded, world without end. See, Israel was actually the world, but at the time of Christ, the world consisted of predominantly Jews, because Judah remained faithful. Ephraim went off into idolatry. All right, let's go back to Romans. Sorry about that. Romans chapter 11. Verse 12. Now, if the fall of them be the riches of the world, who would this world be? And the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, who would these Gentiles be? How much more their fullness? So you see the world and the Gentiles. But if you think those Gentiles are non-Israelites, no, those Gentiles is who you read. Paul's own brethren were Gentiles. 1 Corinthians 12:1 and 2. The dispersed among the Gentiles, John 7:35, was also Gentiles. The saints that he wrote in Ephesus, he told them that they in their times past were Gentiles in their flesh, which means in idolatry. So you got to understand, Israelites were also Gentiles Israelites that were scattered were also Gentiles. Romans 9:24 through 26. Hosea, I will call them my people which were not my people. Hosea 2:23. Romans 9:26. In the place where it was said unto them, it was said unto Israel, you were not my people. Not everybody. So understanding what you read, every time you see Gentiles, you're going to have to make a decision if that's talking about scattered Israelites among the nations, mostly northern kingdom and partly southern, or other nations. You're going to see with your eyes who it is as we read. Watch this. For I speak to you, Gentiles. Notice, it says, for I speak to you, Gentiles. You, Gentiles. Well, who is the letter of Romans to? Let's go back to Romans 1. Who is the letter of Romans written to? You, Gentiles now. Now you're going to see again. Romans chapter 1, verse 7. To all that be in Rome, beloved of God. Stop. Beloved of God. To all that be in Rome, beloved of God. Who is beloved of God? Called to be saints. Before we go anywhere else, who was beloved? Book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah 12. Verse 6. For even thy brethren and the house of thy fathers, even they have dealt treacherously with me, or with thee. Yea, they have called a multitude after thee. Believe them not, though they speak fair words unto thee. For I have forsaken mine house. Mine house is Israel. I have left mine heritage. I have given the dearly beloved of my soul into the hand of her enemies. Who is the beloved here? His heritage, his house. That's his beloved. That's his beloved. His house, his heritage. That's Israel. Israel is his heritage. Right now, let me see if I can come up with a verse. Psalm 78 and 71. Let me prove who his heritage is. From following the ewes great with young, he brought him to feed Jacob, his people, and Israel, his inheritance. Now, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted. That was not what I wanted. I want to go to Joel. Heritage. I don't know why I thought that was it. I want to show you who God's heritage is. I'll read verse 1. It says, for behold, in those days and at that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and will bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel. So God's heritage is Israel. That's his heritage. Proving, let's go back. Jeremiah. Jeremiah 12. Verse 7. I have forsaken mine house. I have left mine heritage. Who is his heritage? Israel. I have given the dearly beloved. So the beloved are Israelites. Of my soul into the hand of her enemies. The beloved is Israelites. And we're going to show you that it's the same in the New Testament. The book of 1 Thessalonians. The beloved are still the Israelites. The book of 1 Thessalonians 1. Verse 3. It says, remembering without ceasing your work of faith and labor of love and patience of hope in our Lord the Messiah Christ in the sight of God and our Father. Look at this. knowing brethren beloved. So the beloved are his brethren. Who's Paul's brethren? Israelites. Your election of God. So the brethren are the beloved. Again, Paul's brethren were Israelites. Man. Both testaments say the same thing. Now, let's look at this. Let's get one more. 2 Thessalonians 2:13. But we are bound to give thanks always to God for you, brethren, beloved of the Lord. The brethren, Paul's brethren, which were Israelites, predominantly Jews at this time. His brethren were Israelites, beloved of the Lord. So the beloved of the Lord are the brethren. As it says Israelites were the beloved in the Old Testament, it's saying in the New, the brethren are the beloved of the Lord. Because God hath from the beginning chosen you to salvation through sanctification of the Spirit and belief of the truth. So the brethren are the beloved. That's why when you go back to Romans 1, see, a lot of Christians, that's simple for us. Because I've seen a lot of Israelites present this, but the Christians, we don't understand what you're talking about. To all that be in Rome, beloved of God. The beloved of God was Israel. Called to be saints. Called to be saints. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and from the Lord the Messiah Christ. Now, when it says called to be saints, you got to understand. There are saints that are going to be saved. And there are saints that are not. See, when it says called to be saints, you could still understand Revelation 5. See, Revelation 5, it's a difference in Revelation 5. See, Revelation 5 is the first place you want to go to confirm what you confirm. Revelation 5, verse 8. And when he had taken the book, the 4 beasts and 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, having every one of them harps and golden vials full of odors, which are the prayers of the saints. Prayers of the saints. Prayers of the saints. And they sung a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof. For thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation. So the saints were redeemed by the blood of Christ out of all nations. And when these saints, which are the children of Israel, were redeemed by the blood of Christ out of every nation, verse 10, and have made us are the saints in verse 8. Not everybody. This verse does not apply to everybody. It does not. And have made us the saints unto our God kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth over the other nations. We're going to crack them with a rod of iron. No getting around it. So there are a group of saints that are going to receive salvation only through the prayers of the righteous. So understanding is key. And in the book of Romans, chapter 1, we can see that this letter is to who? The beloved. The beloved are Israel. So the letter is to those scattered Israelites in Rome. This is the letter. This is who is to, beloved of God. Who is beloved? You read it. No question. So again, wait a minute. Wait. if this letter is to the beloved, which are Israelites, look at, again, doesn't make sense. Watch. For I speak unto you Gentiles. The letter is to the beloved. Head scratcher. If the letter is to the beloved, which are the Israelites, predominantly Jews in Rome, he just said, for I speak to you Gentiles. The letter wasn't to other nations. The letter was to the beloved. Come on now. Again, for I speak unto you Gentiles. The letter was to the beloved. For I speak unto you Gentiles. Again, who would these Gentiles be? It's what you read. Insomuch I am an apostle of the Gentiles. I magnify my office. So when you look at these Gentiles, either you're going to think it's everybody else or northern kingdom sprinkled with southern kingdom. Those that were in idolatry. You got to understand the Israelites in idolatry, Gentiles in the flesh, the dispersed among, who were also called Gentiles by their own brethren. Look at what you're reading when it comes to Gentiles. Watch this. If by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh. Israel, the Jews are of his flesh, that I might save some of them which were of his flesh. Wait now. For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world. For if the casting away of them, Paul is going somewhere. Who was cast away among of them? You have to read that. The book of Hosea. Who got cast away? Hosea 9. Somebody got cast away. Because when the Christians say, for the casting away of them, who was the them that got cast away? You got to understand. Pay attention. Hosea 9:16. Ephraim is smitten, their root is dried up. They shall bear no fruit. Yea, though they bring forth, yet will I slay even the beloved fruit of their womb. The beloved fruit of their womb. My God will cast them away, because they did not hearken unto him. And they, which is Ephraim in verse 16, shall be wanderers among the Gentiles. That's who he cast away. Ephraim is who he cast away. And they became wanderers among the nations. That's who was cast away. Paul understood, and you have to too. If you don't know the Old Testament, please don't read Paul's letters. The book of Romans 11. For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them who was cast away? Now remember, if you're looking at this, that's why it says, if by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are of my flesh. Not just Israel or the Jews were of his flesh, but all Israel was of his flesh. Romans 9:3-4, that I might save some of them. For if the casting away of them, somebody was cast away, be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? Life from the dead. Look at this. For if the first fruit be holy, what first fruit? First fruit be holy. The book of 1 Corinthians 15. For if the first fruit be holy, but now is Christ risen from the dead, and become the first fruits of them that slept. So the first fruits, or the first fruit, would be Christ. Let's go back. Romans 11. For if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, who is the root? Christ. He was the root and offspring of David. Revelation 22:16. Then so are the branches. So are the branches. So the first fruit is Christ. The lump is the people. The root is Christ. The branches are the people. Now here's what we're going to get into. The branches. Now we're at the branches. Now we are at the branches. And if some of the branches be broken off, some of the branches be broken off, and thou, remember the thou is in verse 13. For I speak unto you Gentiles. You Gentiles, which were the beloved of Rome. I speak unto you Gentiles. Pay attention now. And if some of the branches be broken off, Jeremiah. Branches, Jeremiah 11. He didn't say all of the branches were broken off. He said some of them. Some is not all. Jeremiah 11:16. The Lord hath called thy name a green olive tree. Thy name, a green olive tree. So Israel is this green olive tree. Fair and of goodly fruit, with the noise of a great tumult. He hath kindled fire upon it, and the branches of it are broken. See, the branches that were broken off the olive tree was Israelites, not everybody else. And he even tells you why they were broken off. For the Lord of hosts that planted thee hath pronounced evil against thee. Thee is Israel. For the evil of the house of Israel and of the house of Judah, which they have done against themselves to provoke me to anger in offering incense unto Baal. So because of idolatry, because of the evil of both kingdoms, God broke off the branches of the olive tree. Those that committed the evil were the branches that were broken off. You gotta understand that. The branches were broken off because of sin. Sin. That's why the branches were broken off, because of sin. Ezekiel 11:16 is very important. The Lord hath called thy name a green olive tree, fair and of goodly fruit. With the noise of a great tumult, he hath kindled fire upon it. And the branches of it, which was the olive tree, the branches of it, which was of the olive tree, are broken. So the branches of it are broken off this olive tree. For I, the Lord of hosts, that planted thee. The thee is the green olive tree in verse 16. And that pronounced evil against thee, the olive tree, for the evil of the house of Israel and of the house of Judah, which they have done against themselves to provoke me to anger in offering incense unto Baal, idolatry. So again, the evil that the house of Israel and Judah did was idolatry. And that is why they were broken off the olive tree. This isn't talking about other nations. Romans 11. Romans 11. Let's go back. And if some of the branches be broken off, some of them, why were they broken off? Because of idolatry, according to the Bible, sin. And the thou is the Gentiles he's writing to, being a wild olive tree. Now, here is what they're talking, because remember, Gentiles would be this wild olive tree. That's who the wild olive tree is. But who were the Gentiles that would be this wild olive tree? Who have you read were the Gentiles? Those Israelites in idolatry, those dispersed, those who were not a people. They can't get around it. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou being a wild olive tree, the thou, remember, he's calling the thou. You got to keep it. We know how to keep it in context, as they say. For I speak to you Gentiles. So if he's speaking to you, the letter is to you Gentiles. We read that the letter was to the beloved that are in Rome. Again, Paul is calling his brethren Gentiles. Again, there's no other proof to it. Chapter and verse are not going to come with it. Like he called his brethren Gentiles in 1 Corinthians 1 Corinthians 1 and 2, he's doing it again. For I speak unto you Gentiles. So when you go down to verse 17, and if some of the branches be broken off because of evil, sin, and the thou is the Gentiles who is the letter to, being a wild olive tree. Wild olive tree. What made them wild? Let's go back to the book of Hosea. What made them wild? If it's wild, anything that's wild is wild. There's a reason why they became wild. Let's look at this. Hosea 8 and 8. It says, Israel is swallowed up. Now shall they be among the Gentiles. Now shall they be among the Gentiles as a vessel wherein is no pleasure. For they are gone up to Assyria, a wild ass alone by himself. Ephraim hath hired lovers. So the wild was Ephraim. See, we're looking at the word wild. See, that wild does not apply the way people think. That's why when we go to Isaiah 5. Isaiah 5, I think, where would I want to start? Isaiah 5. I wanted to start, I guess, in all right, verse 2. I'll start in verse 1. It says this: Now will I sing unto my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. The vineyard would be Israel. That's in verse 7. My well-beloved have a vineyard in a very fruitful hill, and he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof and planted it with the choicest vine, and built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a winepress therein. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. Wild grapes now. Wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. Understand this, because he's saying it brought forth wild grapes. So now he says, and now, O Jerusalem, and now, O inhabitants. I've been reading a lot of reading a lot. Now the words are starting to get scrambled, but I got to bring it together. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. Me and my vineyard now. What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, it brought it forth wild grapes. Again, wild grapes. And now go to, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up, and break down the walls thereof, and it shall be trodden down. And I will lay it waste. It shall not be pruned nor digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns. And I will command the clouds that they rain no rain. I will command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. Now he's talking about this. Now wild grapes is the reason why they were wild. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. He looked for judgment, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry. See, understand wild here and why it was wild. The reason why the grapes were wild was because there was no judgment. In verse 7, that's why. There was no judgment. See, people think that wild is talking about, well, it's talking about an olive tree that's outside of the original tree. No, the wild is not because of that. That wild is because there was no judgment. See, Christians are taking away the sin of the matter. Romans 11. Romans 11. Verse 17. And if some of the branches be broken off, who was broken off? That you saw. The house of Israel and some members of the house of Judah. Jeremiah 11, 16, 17. And it was because of sin. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou, being a wild olive tree, what made them wild? Was it because they were another type of tree, or because of sin? Think about it. We're going to prove it. What we say. Were grafted in among them. Who would be in thou being a wild olive tree? Were the Gentiles he was talking to were grafted in among them. Who is the them they will be grafted in among? The Jews. But you got to understand, though, when you look at this is a heavy parable. Because when it says we're grafted in among them, you got to think about the them. It's going to be the same people that came out of the tree. Nobody different. And with them partaketh of the root and the fatness, or root and fatness of the olive tree. The them, when it says, and thou being a wild olive tree, it wasn't talking. Yes, the wild olive tree was the Gentiles, but who were they? Who was the letter to? Paul is talking to who the letter was to. That's who, and thou is who the letter was to, being a wild olive tree. So the beloved, called to be saints, used to be wild as branches of the olive tree. Were grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and fatness of the olive tree. Pay attention. Boast not against the branches, but if thou, he's still talking to them, thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. You're not bearing the root, but the root is still going to bear you. Look at this. Thou wilt say then, the branches were broken off, that I might be grafted in. Which branches were broken off and who would be grafted in? The branches that were broken off, you read. That I might be grafted in is going to be explained. Watch. Well, because of unbelief, they were broken off. See, they wasn't broken off just any reason. They were broken off because of unbelief. Now, let's look at what unbelief is. Unbelief. The book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews, chapter 11. No. The book of Hebrews, chapter 3. I want to go to the book of Hebrews 3. I'll do this. I can do this faster here. Hebrews chapter 3 and 12. Paul writes, "Take heed, brethren, lest there be any of you an evil heart of unbelief." An evil heart is a sinful heart of unbelief and departing from the living God. So an evil heart is a sinful heart of unbelief. So unbelief is sin. Those that are in unbelief is because of an evil heart, which is a heart of sin. That's why when you look, Proverbs, we're going to tell you what this means. Proverbs 13:21. Proverbs 13:21. Evil pursueth sinners. See? Evil is always with sinners, but to the righteous good shall be repaid. See, evil pursueth transgressors of the law. Evil will always be with the transgressors of the law because they're the ones that commit the evil. The evil heart is in the sinner. So, going back to Hebrews 3. Hebrews 3, verse 12. Take heed, brethren, lest there be any, or be in any of you, an evil heart of unbelief. So he's telling the brethren, take heed, lest there be any, or be in any of you, a sinful heart of unbelief. So the unbelief is an evil heart, which is sin. A sinful heart and departing from the living God. So we know that unbelief would be because of sin. We keep telling you what this is about. Back to Romans. Chapter 11. Verse 19. Thou wilt say then, the branches were broken off. Why? That I might be grafted in. Why were the branches broken off? That I might be grafted in. Or grafted in. I've been saying grafted, but graft in. Why? Let's go down to verse 20. Here's the important part. Well, because of sin, unbelief, they were broken off. Because of sin. And thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. You keep the law. To fear God is to keep the law. Ecclesiastes 12:13, Psalms 112 and 1. Now, when we go back, for if God spared not the natural branches, which branches did he not spare? The natural branches would be who? Northern Kingdom. Take heed lest he also not spare thee. Now the thee would be to those that were in Rome. So when we're talking about Gentiles grafted in, the Christians have totally changed the meaning of it. The branches, when you look at the branches were broken off because of sin. If the branches were broken off because of sin, where was that written? The book of Jeremiah again. Jeremiah chapter 11 is going to say the same thing. Jeremiah 11 and verse 16. The Lord called thy name a green olive tree. Israel and Judah, we can tell in verse 17, the house of Israel, the house of Judah, that's who the olive tree was. Not no other nation was involved in this. No other nation. The Lord called thy name a green olive tree, fair and of goodly fruit. With the noise of a great tumult, he hath kindled fire upon it, and the branches of it are broken. Broken, the branches. For the Lord of hosts that planted thee, the thee is the olive tree in verse 16. Hath pronounced evil against thee, for the evil of the house of Israel, northern kingdom, and of the house of Judah, southern kingdom. They made up the olive tree. For the evil of both kingdoms. The branches were broken off because of sin, the evil. That's why the branches were broken off, because of sin, evil. For the Lord of hosts has planted thee. The thee is the olive tree in verse 16. For the Lord of hosts that planted thee hath pronounced evil against thee, the olive tree, for the evil of the house of Israel and of the house of Judah. Both kingdoms made up the olive tree in verse 16. No other nation had no part of the olive tree. And members of the olive tree were broken off because of evil. For the Lord of hosts that planted thee, the olive tree, has pronounced evil against thee, for the evil of the house of Israel and of the house of Judah, both kingdoms, which they have done against themselves to provoke me to anger, in offering incense to Baal, for sin, idolatry. So the Lord pronounced evil against that tree which consisted of both kingdoms. No one else was a part of this tree, but both kingdoms. Now, when we go back to Romans 11, verse 20. Well, because of unbelief, because of sin, idolatry, they were broken off. Who was broken off? Northern kingdom. The Gentiles, in this case. And thou standeth by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. Look at this. For if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee. Now, I'm going to show you something, because what we need to remember is all of this is about sin. All of it. So, understanding the breaking off, I'm not trying to say the Jews are not included in the breaking off. They were. They were also a part of the breaking off. Because you got to see whose the letter is to. You got to understand there is a mixture of one and the same. And it was because of unbelief they were broken off. We're talking about the breaking off. We're going to get this straight as we go down. We're mentioning to you the breaking off. Who was broken off? The kingdoms would be those that are broken off. And why were they broken off? Because of unbelief. But northern kingdom widespread, farther off at that time than the Jews were. They were also scattered all over the nations, but it's the bulk. The word had to come through the Jews. Salvation was of the Jews, John 4:22. So the word would have to come through the Jews. But most of northern kingdom with these Jews were scattered and were uncircumcised and were worshiping other gods. Understand what Gentiles actually meant. 1 Corinthians 12:1 and 2. The brethren were Gentiles because of idolatry. Ephesians 2:11, he wrote to the saints. Both tribes, both kingdoms were the saints, and they were Gentiles in their flesh. That's the same thing. Idolatry. They were Gentiles in the flesh, which means in sin. The Gentiles that were to receive mercy in Romans 15:9 will be those Israelites mentioned in Romans 9:24 through 26. They were the Gentiles Paul was talking about. John 7:35, they're dispersed among the Gentiles. You have to see it. So it's a little bit of both in this. For if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee. Look at this. Behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of God on them which fail, severity, but toward thee goodness. If thou continue in his goodness, otherwise thou also shalt be cut off of the olive tree. You also, you that were in Rome, the beloved. Watch as we go on down. And they also, if they abide not still in sin, unbelief, shall be grafted in. For God is able to graft them in again, because they were a part of the olive tree before. Who would he graft in again? Those that were broken off. Who was broken off? The kingdoms, because of sin. If they abide still not in sin, unbelief is sin, shall be grafted in. See, the only way to be grafted in is not to abide in sin. You cannot be in sin and be grafted into this tree. That's the point. If you abide not still in unbelief, shall be grafted in. For God is able to graft them in again. He's not grafting them in again if they're still in unbelief, which is sin. He's grafting in those that abide not in unbelief. This is the point. Christians try to make it to where, well, he's just going to take other trees and blend it with Israel. No. Paul, he says, and they also, the they were the natural branches in verse 21. They were the natural branches, and the natural branches would be who was a part of the tree before. There is no verse in the Bible where Christianity or Christians can give that says all nations were a part of this olive tree before. They don't have that. See, here's where it gets difficult for the Christians, because they cannot prove, for if God spared not the natural branches would be who was part of that tree before. Take heed lest he also spare not thee, meaning you. are in that tree now. Pay attention. And they also, if they abide not still in sin, unbelief, shall be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. Them in again means they were a part of the tree before. This is not talking about bringing in an apple tree to a pear tree. The pear tree lost its branches. So the only grafting in God could do would be bringing in the pears that broke off back to the pear tree. Graft them in again because they were a part of the tree before. This is nothing new. For if thou were cut out of the olive tree, for if thou were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature. How is the olive tree wild by nature? How is that olive tree? How? For if thou were cut out of the olive tree. Who was cut out of the olive tree, which was wild by nature? How was it wild by nature? Because of idolatry. And were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree. A good olive tree. Who was the good olive tree? Who? Back. Wait a minute. Back to Jeremiah. Jeremiah 11. Verse 16. The Lord called thy name a green olive tree, fair and of goodly fruit. So here is the good olive tree. The good olive tree would be who? Goodly fruit now. So who would this good olive tree be? Come on now. It's not going to be everybody. Back to Romans 11. Romans 11. It says, for if thou were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature. Wow. If you were cut out of the olive tree, which was wild by nature, what made them wild? Was it talking about another group of people? No, it's talking about the wild. The wild would be who was noted as wild. Hosea 8 and 9. A wild ass. Ephraim was wild. Not only them, but members of the southern kingdom was wild. That's why we went to Isaiah 5. If you were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? Question mark. There's no way the Christians can get by this. Paul is saying, if you were an olive tree that was wild by nature and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, because it is contrary to nature to bring a wild olive tree into a good one. That's contrary to nature. You can't take a wild olive tree and bring it into a good one. How much more shall these, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? The natural branches be grafted in. They were already there before, and it was their olive tree at first. This has nothing to do with anybody else in this tree except who was broken off and who was grafted in again. The broken off was Israelites in idolatry and sin, and the grafting in will be Israelites that were wild because of sin. But they can be grafted back in to a good olive tree, which is the olive tree that Christ leads. That's why it says, how much more shall these, which be the natural branches? The natural branches is who was cut out of the tree, who were broken off. So this is saying those that are grafted back into the tree were those that were broken off. This does not mean another nation is coming to be grafted into the tree. It gave no indication of that. That's why Paul says, for I would not, brethren. So now, notice, for I would not, brethren. Now here it is again. We're stuck, brethren. Look, brethren, I would not, brethren. So wait a minute. He calls, for I speak unto you Gentiles. But later on, he calls these same Gentiles he's writing to who? For I would not, brethren. How can the Gentiles in verse 13 be his brethren? Like it says in 1 Corinthians 12, 1 and 2. Think. How can he be calling these Gentiles his brethren? But the Bible proves that the brethren is his own kindred. Ask a Christian. How can, look, pay attention. 1 Corinthians 12. See, this is why we tell you. 1 Corinthians 12, 1 and 2. Now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I will not have you ignorant. The brethren are his. I have a feeling that I need to take you to that. Romans 9, verse 3. For I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen, according to the flesh, who are Israelites. There's no other brethren besides your kinsmen according to the flesh. Your kinsmen according to the flesh. Ezekiel 11:15, Son of man, thy brethren, even thy brethren, the men of thy kindred, the men of thy kindred. Your brethren is the men of your kindred. The book of Esther 10 and 3. For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren. His brethren was the Jews. Mordecai was a Jew, and his brethren were Jews. Mordecai Jew, brethren Jews. See? And seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace unto his seed. So your brethren was your people. Your seed. There's no verse in the Bible that's going to say nations called other nations or nations referred to other nations as brethren. No, your brethren was your own people. So tell me how. When we go back to the book of Romans, tell me how now. Romans 11, verse 13. When it says, for I speak unto you Gentiles. You, the letter you is you Gentiles. Who the letter is to. But down in verse 25, for I would not, brethren. So the Gentiles were brethren. You see the same thing in 1 Corinthians 12, 1 and 2. It's the same thing. This is what we're telling you. When you see Gentiles, when they say Israelites were Gentiles, they were. Now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I would not have you ignorant. Ye know that ye were Gentiles. The brethren were Gentiles. Brethren, his own people, they were Gentiles. Why? Ye know that ye were Gentiles carried away unto these dumb idols. They were Gentiles because of idolatry. Idolatry. No way around it. You can't go now you're back at Romans 11. Romans 11:13. This is what you need to see, brothers and sisters. When Paul says, for I speak to you, you got to understand the letter is to who? For I speak to you Gentiles. You Gentiles. Insomuch I am an apostle of the Gentiles. I am apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine office. So Paul's office was magnified through the teachings of his brethren in idolatry, those that were scattered among the Gentiles, dispersed among the Gentiles, being called Gentiles by their brethren, because of idolatry and uncircumcision. You can't say that I speak it to you Gentiles and then come down to verse 25 and says, I would not brethren. So these Gentiles that were you were brethren. Like it says in 1 Corinthians 12, 1 and 2. Ephesians 2:11. I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. These Gentiles would be who? We've shown you. That's why it says, and so all Israel shall be saved, because Israel were those Gentiles. That's the mystery. We're showing you, we showed you through the Bible who the Gentiles were. Scattered Israelites in idolatry, primarily northern kingdom, few southern kingdom. That's why Paul says that so all Israel shall be saved, because the Gentiles were those scattered Israelites in idolatry. Those Gentiles in the flesh called the uncircumcision. Those dispersed among the Gentiles called Gentiles. Those that will receive mercy, Romans 15:9 was proven in Romans 9:24 through 26. The Gentiles that will receive mercy was in Hosea, and they were Israel. All through the Bible you see it. That's why it says, and so all Israel shall be saved, because that is who those Gentiles were. The wicked. Those Gentiles were the Israelites in idolatry, in sin. You saw it. A Gentile does not mean non-Jew, non-Israel. It does not. It means what you read. And our people don't want to accept that, because they want to be Gentiles under the authority of a group of ministers that had them in slavery before. Understand what you're reading. Paul, I will not, brethren. That's why when it says in Acts 15, Acts 15, see, if you let them tell you what Gentiles is instead of show you, you'll never know it. Acts 15 and verse 23, it says, and they wrote letters by them after this manner, and the apostles and elders and brethren sent greetings unto the brethren which are of the Gentiles in Antioch and Syria and Cilicia. So there were brethren which were of the Gentiles, meaning those brethren were Gentiles. Israelites were Gentiles. The brethren which are of the Gentiles. They're of them. They were them. Verse after verse. When you really want to understand Gentiles being grafted in, don't let them take you to it being, other nations being grafted in. No, when you're looking at the Gentiles grafted in, the key is here. Verse 23, and they also, if they abide not still in sin, because they were broken off because of sin. Other nations were not broken off this olive tree because of sin. Israel was. You read it. Jeremiah 11, 16, 17. They were broken off because of sin. And they also, if they abide not still in sin, unbelief, shall be grafted in. For God is able to graft them in again because they were a part of the tree before. Other nations were not broken off because of unbelief. Israel was. That's why he's telling you, for if thou would be to the Gentiles in verse 13. The subject is the Gentiles. Were cut out of the olive tree which is wild by nature. If you were cut out, which were wild, you Gentiles, which were wild by nature, who would them Gentiles be? And were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree. This olive tree is a good one. It went from the wild to the good. If the letter is to the Gentiles, who would them Gentiles be? Gotta go with what the Bible says. It doesn't say none Israelite, none Jew. No. You read what it said. And if thou were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, if you were cut out of one that was wild by nature, you were cut out of a wild olive tree by nature. And were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree. So if you were cut out of an olive tree which is wild by nature, cut out, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree. So you were cut out of one and you were grafted into another. He's using an example here. How much more shall these, which be the natural branches? All nations were never the natural branches. Never. You can't prove that by chapter and verse. You're gone, Christians. How much more shall these, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? Those that were broken off would be grafted back into the olive tree. Not anybody coming from anywhere could be grafted in here. No. That's why it says, for I would not brethren. See, these Gentiles were brethren. When he says, I speak to you Gentiles in verse 13, look at this. Brethren. How is it that he's calling these Gentiles in verse 13? Look, pay attention. For I speak unto you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine office. But later on, he's going to call you Gentiles brethren. That makes sense, because other nations are not brethren to Paul. Only his people are brethren. I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part hath happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. Who would these Gentiles be that come in? Those that were broken off. Broken off. You can't make it anything else. The come in is those that were broken off. So these Gentiles that were broken off would be who according to the Bible? Who? The scattered Israelites in idolatry. That's why it's important you know. It's important you know. Again, 1 Corinthians 12, verse 1. Now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I will not have you ignorant. Ye know that ye were Gentiles, carried away unto these dumb idols. Dumb idols. That is being cut out of the wild olive tree by nature. Because they had become wild. Why? because of idolatry. Sin, even as ye were led. So they were Gentiles because of idolatry. That's why it says carried away unto these dumb idols. You were Gentiles because you were worshiping dumb idols. Just like it says in the book of Ephesians 2. Ephesians 2. Verse 11. Wherefore remember that ye being in times past Gentiles in the flesh who are called uncircumcision. Gentiles in the flesh was idolatry, sin. And who is this letter to once again? The saints. Look at who the letter's to. The saints would be who Paul is talking to. And in their times past, they were Gentiles in the flesh because of idolatry, uncircumcision, sin. Gentile does not mean non-Israelite, non-Jew. It does not. That's why it's back to Romans 11. Back to Romans 11. Verse 25. For I would not, brethren, now, brethren, this is not multi-ethnic. You can see Paul called his brethren Gentiles because of idolatry twice. Saints and faithful brethren. That was Ephesians 1:1. He told you again, time after time, Paul said that his brethren were Gentiles because of idolatry. We continue to show. You can't get by us, Christians. You can't get by us. You can't get by us. You can't get by us. That ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. The fullness of the Gentiles is showing you who these Gentiles are. That's why when you look at the next verse, because you can't let them tell you. And so all Israel shall be saved, as it is written. What does all Israel being saved have to do with the Gentiles coming in? Because those Gentiles were the scattered Israelites in idolatry and uncircumcision. That's why. Dispersed among the people. They were called Gentiles themselves, the dispersed. Those that will receive mercy. Romans 9:24-26. These are the Gentiles Paul is talking about that have to come in. And then all Israel shall be saved, because the Gentiles were the Israelites in the first place, like we've been telling you. And with that, brothers and sisters, the little fun we had, I enjoyed. All praises to the Most High. We'll be back with you, I guess, tomorrow with maybe a 10-minute episode. I don't know. But peace be unto you, brothers and sisters. Just wanted to get in the clarity, because I wanted you to understand that when it comes down to these verses, where it says, and if some of the branches be broken off, they were broken off because of sin, and thou being a wild olive tree. Wild. Why? Because they were among other nations. But that wild does not just imply Hosea 8:9, but that wild also implies sin. Not just wild, also implies sin. Were grafted in among them. That's why it says in the thou, he's talking about the Gentiles, the same Gentiles in verse 13, right? You got to look at the thous and the these and the ye's. Those are possessive. I speak to you, Gentiles. The same you, Gentiles, in verse 25, he called brethren, like he did in 1 Corinthians 1. Excuse me, I keep saying 1. 1 Corinthians 12, 1 and 2. He called those brethren Gentiles like he's calling these brethren here, Romans 11, 25, Gentiles in verse 13. We know what we're talking about. You Gentiles, he calls brethren in verse 25. But dipping back down, hold on. And if some of the branches be broken off, and if thou, still the Gentiles, verse 13, who he called brethren in verse 25, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. See, if some of them were broken off, and thou, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in. See, you can't be grafted in unless you're broken off. This isn't talking about grafting anybody else. Look at this. Thou wilt say then, the branches were broken off. Why? That I might be grafted in. Why were those branches broken off? Well, because of sin, they were broken off. They were broken off because of sin. No other nation is a part of this. And thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. He's talking to those that are still in the tree, but they're still in the tree because they are not in unbelief. That's why they're still in that, because they are not abiding in unbelief. Because of unbelief, they were broken off. For if God spare not the natural branches, take heed lest he also not spare thee. Why did he not spare the natural branches? Because of unbelief. Understand what you're reading. Paul never went off of anything else coming into this tree. It was what was broken off because of sin. Because of idolatry. That's why he says in verse 23, and they also, if they abide not still in unbelief, shall be grafted in. Who will be grafted in? Those that abided not in unbelief. Because of unbelief, they were broken off. But if they still abide in unbelief, they're going to stay broken off. But if they abide not in unbelief, they shall be grafted in. They're grafted in under a condition. They're just not grafted in. It was a condition that would cause them to be grafted in. And it's here. And the they is who was broken off. The only ones that were broken off was Israelites. And why were they broken off? Because of sin, unbelief. And they, if they abide not still in unbelief, shall be grafted in. For God is able to graft them in again, because they were a part of the tree before. There's a condition on being grafted in, and it is if you abide not in sin, you can be grafted back in. This had nothing to do with other nations coming into the olive tree. For if thou, the same brethren he's talking to, remember, he's talking to the brethren in verse 25. For if thou, the brethren, were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted in contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, those that were broken off because of unbelief, which be the natural branches, because they were a part of the tree before, be grafted into their own olive tree? It wasn't somebody else coming into the olive tree. It was those that were broken off, and those that were broken off was Israel. If you're keeping it in context, this has nothing to do with the other nations. Nothing. That's why he says, for I will not have you ignorant brethren. Now he's calling these Gentiles, when he says you Gentiles in verse 13, now he's calling them brethren? Yes, because they were his brethren. These were the Jews that were in idolatry. Gentiles in the flesh, called the uncircumcision, his brethren, the saints. That's why he says, brethren, brethren, that ye should not be ignorant of this mystery. It was a mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits or thoughts. That blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles, those that were broken off, be come in. The Gentiles that would be, why were they Gentiles? Because they were broken off. Because of sin. That's why. And so all Israel shall be saved. Because the Gentiles that had to come in were the scattered Israelites in idolatry. That's why. That's why you got to understand what the meaning of Gentiles is. It's not non-Israelite, non-Jew. It is what you read. All Israel having to be saved and the Gentiles come in, it doesn't make sense unless these Gentiles were who you read they were. The dispersed. Those that would get mercy. Paul's brethren in 1 Corinthians 12, 1 and 2. I think the 1 is because I say, but you can see, we read who these Gentiles would be. None of them said non-Israelite, non-Jew. So these Gentiles would be the scattered Israelites in idolatry, predominantly Jews at this time. That's why. And so all Israel shall be saved, because it was talking about both kingdoms in the first place being broken off. Being broken off. That's why they had to be reconciled back into the world among their brethren. That is the grafting in. And again, with that, brothers and sisters, all praises. May God be with you. Peace be with you and love. All praises.